Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I just want to let you know that we are recording this via WebEx, and so this will be able to be shared later on. I am here to introduce today Dr. Kristy Vienne. She is a certified auxiliary service professional, and today she's going to be talking about demystifying House Bill 8. In this session, we will review the new House Bill 8 formula funding model and the progression the changes have had this past year and what to expect for fiscal year 25. We will review the outcomes related to the new model and how they impact the college and funding we receive. This will be an interactive session allowing for questions and answers and discussions related to the college budget and House Bill 8 outcomes. All right. Welcome, Dr. Kristy Vienne, Vice Chancellor of Finance and Administration.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me here to join you today. It was my understanding is that wanted to learn a little bit about the new House bill funding, and I've also have some data sets and some other information that I'll share with you. I do want this to be interactive. I do want you to feel like you can ask questions if you need to elaborate. I will give the disclaimer is that I don't know that I should always be teaching this class about demystifying House Bill 8 because I have to admit that I'm probably still a student myself as this has been rolled out in the last year and has been ever changing. So I will ask for some grace as we continue to unpack all the rules and regulations that come with this. But I wanted to be able to provide a high level for you all as faculty so you could understand how this impacts you, how it impacts our system, how it impacts our students. And so I really wanted to put this together from that lens. And so there's a lot of text, there's a lot of content in these slides, so I don't want you to be overwhelmed with the content because I'm going to share those slides with you so you have it for reference. A lot of that was when you leave, when you go back to your office or you're trying to do research or if you're interested in the data, you'll have the information. I don't want you to feel like everything that you need to do is, being read from up there. So I just wanted you to know a lot of that was for context so that if I'm not in front of you to explain it, when you got back to your office, you could at least understand or have a chance to digest what's going on. So really talking about this session is just a brief overview. I'm going to try to unpack the last year and what that's looked like, how it impacts us, and then just kind of looking at the key components. And so I like visual. I'm a visual learner. So I always think the graphics are very helpful when we're talking about legislation. So when we refer to it as House Bill 8, it really is the House bill that was passed by the state of Texas that really put community college funding completely upside down. I mean, it really did change it. Probably the most dramatic change in financing for higher education in anybody's lifetime, right? It's pretty dramatic in that regard. And I think for the better. So as much as I say it's complicated and it's changed, I will give the assertion that it will really benefit the students. It will benefit Lone Star. I really think it will benefit the state of Texas. But we'll talk about some of the challenges that will also be there and some transparency. For some of the sources, I just want to let you know a lot of this has been taken directly from the coordinating board. I didn't think reinventing the wheel was necessary. So a lot of the content, a lot of the slides either came directly from presentations from the coordinating board, from their quarterly meetings, or from sessions that I've attended, and tried to put that together in a somewhat brief synopsis because I think I've probably sat through about 30 hours of training on this so far this year. So you're kind of getting the high level view of that information. So when we talk about the key components, we're going to talk about FAST. So many of you may have heard about that, and I'll get into more detail a little bit later on what that means and how it impacts our students. But we also, the main thing when you look at this is really the performance tier and the base tier. And those are kind of the biggest pieces of this formula that we'll talk about. For those who really like to get into theory and understanding kind of the empirical work for this, I think it's important for you to know that all the goals associated with House Bill 8 and the new funding really goes back to building a talent strong Texas. which if you've been at this for a while, 60 by 30 was the previous, right? Closing the gap. So you can kind of keep going back and back. And I know I'm dating myself, but as you look at all of those initiatives, all of the goals related to House Bill 8 and this funding tied directly back to building a talent strong Texas. And that was to work on, the attainment of post-secondary credentials, looking at credentials of value, and of course, research, development, and innovation. So I'm not going to spend all of our time reading through that, but I just thought it was important for you to understand if you were looking for the theory, if you were looking for kind of the empirical reasons why a lot of the, basis for this was tied back to that building a talent strong Texas. So if you're not familiar with that, I highly encourage you to go out there, read, get a little insight of that, and it may help you understand why they picked these specific outcomes and these specific attainments as their goals, because again, they are strategically tied back to that plan. So I feel like sometimes that context is not allowed or elaborated on. So I wanted for you to have that. And so when we look at it and we talk about previous model and current model, I think it's important to say there was the financial funding prior to House Bill 8. And then there's also been already about 5 to 6 different iterations of House Bill 8 since it was rolled out in fiscal year 24, which would have been last fall, right? So as we talk about this, prior to House Bill 8, our funding was really based off of students and seats. That's what it came down to. It was really based on how many folks came in the door. And then we got bonus checks, let's just call them, when we had really positive student success outcomes. But that was a very small percentage of what our state appropriations were, okay? So House Bill 8 is really all completely opposite of that. So when I say it flipped, it's on its head. So it is really completely different. And now the new funding model is based off of performance outcomes. There is a base tier, and we'll talk about that, but the main thing to understand is performance outcomes. And so as we talk about that, that's really what we're focused on. So 95% of all community colleges will receive the majority of their state appropriations based off of performance tier. Okay, so 95% of the state allocation will be based off of performance tier. So it's the complete opposite of what we used to do. 5% will be based off of the base tier. Lone Star is not eligible, nor will we receive base tier funding. So we get no base tier funding, which is okay. It's not been detrimental to us. And as we educate you on this, I want to make sure you understand how it works for the system and then how it works for Lone Star. Because for Lone Star, we have enough in our performance base from our tax base that we don't qualify for the base tier. So again, on the graphic, you can see. So in this situation, College A would be what they take as a formula, and they figure out how much it costs for us to have instruction and operation. And the state backed into that number and said, okay, what does it teach you to teach and do all the things that you do? And that's based off of what we teach, where we teach it, how we teach it, what disciplines, all those matter, right? And so they've come up with a baseline figure of what it should cost us to cover what that would really be faculty instruction. Okay, so if you ever hear me give a presentation and someone says, where do our state appropriations go? Our state appropriations go to instruction, right? So we cover 100% of our faculty instruction towards the state allocation. So that's kind of the first source that we use there. But in this model, you can see for the local share, what they figure out is in scenario 1, this would be the instruction cost. And so in this model, this particular school would not receive the base tier because they don't need it. So in this scenario, only one college would actually receive the base tier because they're not covering instruction. So the 5% was really put in play to help those smaller districts that could not afford to cover instruction based off of their local tax base. So that's the easiest way to explain it, is that if they're not getting enough through their local taxes to be able to support themselves, then they would qualify for that additional 5%. That's so that we didn't hurt the smaller community college or those in maybe a rural area that did not have the tax base that what we have to pull from. So again, it's much more complex. There's a whole formula and worksheet, but the short end of it is that's why we don't qualify. And that's okay, because I would much rather have the other schools that need the support to have that 5% and us focus on what we call the performance tiers. So when we're looking at the fundable outcomes, performance tier really is where we used to just get those bonus checks based off of outcome. Now that is 100% of our state appropriations. It really is about funding credentials of value and how we've done in the classroom. So when we look at the changes, the main thing is these are the ways that we now receive funding from the state. And they're through the credentials of value, fundable outcomes, high demand fields, and alignment of incentives. So this is kind of a high level overview to say it no longer matters how many students you have in your seats. It matters how many you finish with and where they go on to. So I think as we talk about it from a faculty lens, as we talk about it from a curriculum, I think that's the point that I want to drive home. I think you will hear that from, yes. No, nothing. We get zero from the state. So I do want to qualify. So, and again, I don't want to spill too much of the convocation presentation tomorrow, but we have four funding sources: tax revenue, tuition and fees, state appropriations, and auxiliaries. So students still pay tuition and fees, though that's not enough to cover instruction themselves. But no, in theory, a community college, or at least Lone Star, because we're not rescinding base pay, we get not $1 just because a student showed up to attend your class. Not one. Yeah, wow, right? It's a big deal, right? So it used to be enrollment. And that's not that it's not important, but again, I'm going to say it one more time. It's not how many you start with. It's how many you finish with and what they do with that, where they go from there. All right, so we're going to dig into some of the outcomes and the data, but I just want to drive that home. 20 people in your class, fabulous. You end up with 6 at the end of the semester, right? And so that's at least the way the state views it. Okay, so I just want to kind of go back to the state, getting credentials, getting people to better jobs, right? And all those things. We want people to have wages that they can support themselves, right? So that is kind of why their whole method of funding us, they believe, should be geared to what are we doing to educate our taxpayers to put them back in the workforce, get them better paying jobs so that they can continue to pay taxes, and it's kind of a cyclical process. So again, I know there's a lot of text here, but I want to point out some of the high levels. So when we're looking at credentials of value, they are really, again, it's a complex formula, and I have all this in a data sheet for you all. But when you look at it, we actually get premium funding for a student who's earning a credential of value, who's projected to achieve a positive return on investment at or before a target year. So this has been a new one that they've just added. I will preface this to say we're still trying to figure out how we track all that. But in theory, what that's looking at is if a student graduates, not only are they graduating with a credential of value, but how long did it take them to earn enough funding to hit a certain level, right? So that's basically what that means. So not only are they funding us completely different, but it does matter as to the disciplines that we're teaching and what the living wage is, if you will, behind that. So that's why when you're seeing the presentations, you're hearing people talk about, it's no longer just about teaching someone to have a credential, but where is that chart on the priority list, right? And so you'll hear the chancellor talk about, you'll hear some of the deans talk about, you'll hear different folks talk about kind of that workforce or that priority listing of occupations or a credential of value. And again, this is kind of where it's coming from, right? It's making sure that is, again, if it's in the sciences, if it's a nurse, right? Occupational health, all these credentials of value have a little bit more weight than if we're just educating someone to be a typewriter repair person. And obviously I'm being facetious there, but obviously that may be 1,001 on the scale as opposed to occupational therapy or dental hygiene being 1 or 2, right? So yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Right. And so that's where it's a little counterintuitive to the funding, because the funding model is actually going to pay you more based off of the salary, not necessarily the need. So again, but that's where as an institution, we have to look at what's still important to our community. So that doesn't mean that we should always just be chasing the dollars, right? And there are times where we're going to say this is important because it's important to our community. And so I think that's what we can't lose sight of, right? We have to find what that balance is. And I think we're all cognizant from a strategic level to understand that there is a delicate dance that takes, right? It's what the community needs, where we need to put people, but also one of the trustees brought it up recently at a board meeting regarding the need to have home health care, right? Don't pay a lot, but we need it, right? There's not, if you have an elderly parent or family member, it's very hard to be able to afford or have someone. So, but how do then we get those people living wages, right? So it's an empirical conversation, but yeah, so there is a dance to that. We're not going to always just chase the dollars, but we have to at least understand where we sit in the pro forma and what it means. So I think that's the key point is, and I've had someone say, they're like, this program will never make money. That's okay, as long as you understand that, right? So, and so we have to understand, but everything can't fall into that category, right? Something has to give, and so we have to find that balance as an institution. So I hope that helps. So when you're looking at the various fundable outcomes, again, we're looking at the fundable outcomes, high demand fields. So again, there's a couple of different things with that as well. So there's statewide high demand fields. There are regional high demand fields. And then as an institution, we can actually petition to have 5 essential occupations added for our region. So maybe this particular region had a huge need for something that wasn't necessarily isolated to this area. So solar panels, solar power, things like that might be in North Texas, right? Where they may have a higher need for that based off of manufacturers and skills in that particular area. So you could petition to have that potential credential added and looked at to see if your institution could move that to a high demand, meaning not everybody would get it, but as an institution, you can identify those 5 key community areas and those could be looked at. Again, there is an application. It has to go through all the checks and balances, but that is at least a new thing that they've added that we can also do. There is also weights. So there's outcomes and there's weights. So if someone is going through a high value occupation, we get a certain reimbursement for them. But if they're also an adult learner or a low SES, or right, we get added bonus checks for that. So you might have an additional person earning additional outcomes based off of additional weights. So I know that's a mouthful, but it's a very complex formula to unpack. But alignment of incentives, meaning that students that are over 25 also get a higher level of weight than what you might see from a traditional student in reimbursement. Again, going back to the strategic plan and educating an older workforce. Dual credit, they did remove double counting, meaning more than one institution can't count a dual credit student. So that was something that came back in this summer. Only one college gets credited for the transfer. So like if we transferred someone to an institution, only one of us would get the credit. You can't what you call double dip. So that was been a recent change. And so I say all that to say, I don't know that you can see this as well as I'd like, but I'll try to point out that these are the standard value that we get for what they call performance tier input. So I try to put it all in one place. And if you're like me and you have to have cheaters, I apologize that the font is low. But what this says, 15 semester credit hours for dual credit, we would receive $3,500. Okay, so let me put that in perspective. If a student comes to us and they leave Lone Star with 15 credit hours, we will get a bonus check, if you will, but that's not really a bonus anymore because it's our state funding. We would get $3,500. But if a student only takes 2 classes as a junior and 2 classes as a senior, because that's what the way most students are set up, right, in the high schools, that they only leave us with 12 hours. What do you think we get for 12 hours? Nothing. We would only get the tuition that they paid, right? So again, is dual credit good? Yes. I think it serves a very good purpose. It is a very good program, but we have to understand the funding model associated with it, right? So we would only receive credit from the state for dual credit when they hit 15 hours. We would receive nothing prior to that. That just because there's a lot of questions about dual credit. So I just want to make that very clear. And that's obviously a new item. If someone transfers to an institution, so a student comes to us, they have 15 hours, they decide to go to Sam Houston, we would then receive an additional $3,500 for that person because we articulated them to a 4-year institution to continue their degree. With this, if they're co-enrolled, you could also receive that. Institutions leading to licensure or certification, $1,000. This is where it goes back to your point, but if it's a high demand field, it's $1,250. Right? So occupational skills, 1,000. If it's high demand, it's $1,250. So I don't want to read all those for you. I will, again, share these PowerPoints and you can have this as a brief overview, but you can get an idea of what it looks like and how we're now funded. So besides tuition and fees and tax revenues, this is the way we are funded for student outcomes. So it really is about how well students perform and what we're doing to invest in our college and our students to get them to a certification, to a 4-year degree, to get them to a path to some level of credential. So that's where advising, that's where a classroom, that's where all those wraparound services also comes into play. Yes, sir. Potentially for the student, yes. Potentially, but it depends on when it occurs and in what year. And I'll show you that in the data set, but this is based on a 3-year rolling average with the highest of those. And so there's some averaging going in, which is the con part of the formula. So I'm all about this, but our funding is more dynamic than it's ever been. So it's great to do good and it's great to earn money through this. But the problem is it can go away and it's not stable, which is why it's difficult for us. You know, we have to be very intentional about where those funds go and what they're used for so that we don't fund something that maybe next year we're not getting the funding for, right? So this is one of those things is you really can't let off the throttle, right? And I mean that to say, if you've ever worked in a commissionable world where you make commission, it's great if you have a great month and you load everything and you get a great payday. But if you haven't been kind of bringing things in that next month, you know, you hit a downslide. So that's what I mean by this with the formula funding. It's very dynamic, meaning we could have a huge year and then the next year you see a huge swing in our outcomes, right? So that's why we have to be careful with tying that to like full-time or permanent funds because of this dynamic models. I believe I saw, yes, ma'am. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, but I think it's still contributing in a way that that's a very fundamental need that they have to have, right? And it's so I consider it like scaffolding. We may not be receiving hard dollars for it, but it's so key to the scaffolding because if that's not there, a student's not able to pursue other endeavors. So I would say, again, kind of to our point is just because we're not receiving outcomes or funding from it doesn't mean it's not a reason to do it. Yeah, no, it's good. So we only get the 15 if they were dual credit. So the 15 is dual credit specifically. Correct. If they transfer, then you would see the funds for that, or we would as an institution get funds for that. But again, that's where I think, but without that service, without that fundamental core of understanding the language, right, there's really no ability for someone to kind of, you know, no, it's all good. Tell me what you mean by F1, sorry. If we have, and again, but when I don't guess I understand your definition, what you mean by. Okay. So international students, I don't think we would receive funding for because we would not receive funding from an out of state model as well. So that's where it's that rolling 3-year average. And that's why our data and our data sources really come into play, because right now they will shore us up. So they've given us our allotment for this year. But if we don't hit that by February, then they'll be like, hey, warning, you're not meeting your outcomes. And then the next fiscal year, we would owe those funds back to them, or they would shore us up in that. So that's the con that I talked about, where we have to be very intentional. So if you hear me say, sometimes our revenues look really great, but I can't tie this to permanent funds, one-time investments, one-time things, that's where a lot of times you'll hear me speak, and you may even hear the Chancellor or others speak about that, because we have to be very intentional of not tying these to hard dollars that then we catch ourselves upside down if we have a bad turn. So, which we don't want to have, right? But we're in Houston, there is going to be a storm, right? There is going to be some kind of weather event. It's not a if, but a when. So what we have to do, again, it goes back to advising and outcomes and wraparound services and how we continue to support those students and get them through the pipeline. But yeah. Yes. So based off of what we're currently seeing, again, so I have not looked at fall 25 numbers, right? Because enrollment, we're still getting students in. So we're not looking at projections for FY25. For FY24, we were ahead of where we have been. So it has been to the benefit of Lone Star at this point. But again, that's where the outcomes come in, that we have to continue the momentum to get students graduated and through the pipeline, so we don't lose that momentum. Right, which is also why we are careful to make sure that we don't tie our new priorities to state funding. So it is a balance to say, so a lot of times people say, well, look, you have this money, why can't we hire 40 new faculty, right? And so part of that is just kind of tying it back to say, we're not going to base new faculty or any new FTEs off of state appropriations, because it's not right, unless we can show that it's an area that we've never dipped below, right? So is that helpful? So just now, again, this has changed about 5 times this year. Our formula funding for this year changed 5 times, with the latest iteration coming July 1, with a budget that had to be finished by August 1. So I'm just putting that in perspective. And again, it changed 5 times. So it's a very ever evolving. We are very excited about the opportunities to have this model with Lone Star. This model looks to be a very good benefit to Lone Star. I think the importance of me visiting with you all today and continuing to do that is to share the narrative with those that it really is not just about head count. Not that that's ever been what Lone Star is about, but I think we just have to kind of shift our focus, that we want to really support those students that we have and keep them through and get them to graduation. So I hope that helps. And we will continue to look, and I'll show you some modeling where you can actually play around with it yourself. This was just released about 3 weeks ago. I have played in it enough to be dangerous while trying to build the budget and the LARs and all the other things we've been tied up with. But in the next couple of weeks, I hope to also give some scenarios out of some of the data sets that we have. So I thought I saw a hand, and I want to move. Other questions, comments? So again, as we're talking about achieving positive returns, when we're talking about credentials of values, when we talk about these various aspects, a lot of these definitions, again, are on the coordinating board's website. There are things of you that have been in workforce in these areas for a long time, are second nature, and how we refer to those. But when we're talking about kind of the credentials of value baseline, it really is the conferred credentials, and that a student has that they recoup the net cost of attendance within 10 years. And then again, to be considered a premium is meaning they're recouping their cost of their education in a much shorter time frame, which again goes back to the focus of it really is about the salary that they will earn with said credential. So if somebody's coming in, they're expected to earn $80,000 versus someone who might earn $30,000 a year. Obviously, that's where about that one might be considered a value premium, because they're going to be able to pay back that education cost in a much shorter period of time. So that's just kind of the overarching idea. And again, a lot of these were in the chart, but when we're looking at what we're getting funding for, associate's degrees, bachelor's degrees, level 1 or 2 certificates, advanced technical certificates, occupational skills. So all of those different items have different value sets. And again, if they're a certain age, if they are a certain premium, we get additional weights, if you will. And so that is just kind of looking at the new credentials that they're looking at. These two, sorry, up there it's kind of blocking, but these were relatively new. So these were presented in FY24. This is new with FY25, meaning that they've rolled out ability to have fundable credentials for Texas Opportunity high school diplomas and third-party credentialing. So again, I'm still unpacking those and how that impacts Lone Star specifically, but these are very relatively newly added at recommendations from across the state of new credentials that previously we would not have gotten funded for. And again, I talked about the regional high demands and the essential occupations. And so again, as an institution, we can apply for additional occupations. So yeah, I'll go back just so, oh, it doesn't want to go back, sorry. So regional high demand, so we can look at our top fields and we can see if something is more specific to us. Okay. Okay. Sorry, now it's decided it didn't want to advance. Don't know what happened there. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sorry, it just stopped advancing all of a sudden. I don't know what it. Mm-hmm. That's correct. Correct. The 22%. Mm-hmm. Correct. That's correct. Yeah, you said it much more eloquently than I have. So yes, the largest percentage of our funding as an institution comes from taxes, which has been anywhere from about 48%, kind of varies depending on the year. And then tuition and fees. And then yes, about 22%. I think prior to FY24, it was around 20. So with this new model each year, we've shifted 1 percentage point. So FY23, we were at 20%, 21, 22. So to your point, whether it's been advantageous, we have grown on that positive side by about 2% from the state allocations. But yes, this is only factoring in that 22% of the state allocation. So does that help? So yes, this is, we still get our tax, we still get tuition. This is just the state allocation. Okay. So again, just another way for you to see adult learners, dual credit, transfer outcomes, and how they're looking to align the methodology. So for those that really enjoy the methodology part, this is how the state has gotten to aligning the incentives with the desired outcome. Is they're looking at the age, the type, the transfer, the forecast. We have to send them through our AIR or data. We send them data sets that they have used to back in to this formula so that we can determine what our funding allocation is and how much we receive per unit. And so that is really how we've kind of backed into the process. Sorry, it stopped changing on me. So I'm trying to, don't know why. Okay, so this is just a little bit of the milestones when we talk about the milestones this year, just to let you know. The base tier and performance tier funding originally came out in 24, and they kind of gave us some standard rules. In April, they came out with additional baseline and premium tiers. And then again, in July, they've changed the weights, they changed the fundable outcomes, and they made it much more a dynamic process. What was interesting is when they gave us the funding in FY24, we didn't quite know where it came from. So as an institution, we had to back into figuring out where they came up with the figure they gave us. Since then, and as of July, they've now actually given us that methodology. So that would have been really good early on, but it's okay. We were able to figure it out. So now we actually have the methodology in July as to how they got there, and we can play around with some of the tools they've just given us and actually see and give scenarios. So if you're one of those people that are like, what if I added a program in this? And I see some heads, and I know my folks that really love their data, and I will show you where you have access to actually go play with that if you care to, and you won't be able to mess it up. So go ahead. Yep. So her question is, who's making those decisions? So originally it was a committee advising the coordinating board. And so this was the first time, again, in Texas history, at least that I remember or recent knowledge, that they've ever actually had legislation in the same year that it was actually going to take effect, meaning they approved it in July of 23 and it was impacted or in play September 1, meaning they said, here's our funding and then figure out the rules as you go. So there was some rule changing along the way. So in giving grace to them, that's why there's been a lot of changes, because they had to back into this process. But there has been committees, there has been advisement, there has been groups from across the state that have been giving input on that. Our former Chancellor, Dr. Head, was a part of those original committees and gave a lot of input on this. And we continue through our areas now to keep kind of our pulse on things as they've been evolving and changing out. It's really kind of gearing back more toward the coordinating board, but there has been a committee and their website has all the membership of who that is if you're interested. So yeah. Other questions related to that? So again, as we look at it, you can see fundable outcomes, semester credit hours, weights. Again, if they're economically disadvantaged, we get a 25% basis point increase. Academically disadvantaged, increase. Adult learner, you get a 50 basis point increase. So that's kind of just some examples of what that looks like. And so again, to your point when we were asking about data availability, what they based us on right now is FY 18 to 23, which, as we know, COVID and all those fun things were a part of some of those years, were used to predict the traditional outcomes. And then data from 20 to 23 were used to base occupational skills awards. So again, Lone Star has to certify our data, load it to the state, and that's what the state is using for the methodology. So the data is key, right? We have to keep good numbers. There's a lot of these things that previously we weren't tracking or had not been an outcome we needed to track. So we've had to kind of back in to several of those. Guardrails, year to year, they're going to limit what we grow on that by 10% up and 5% down. But again, we still could owe the state those appropriations back in the next fiscal year. So again, very hesitant to tie new funds, new reoccurring funds to these sort of things, because it's great to be ahead. But again, you don't want to project those funds and have an off year and the state cut those funding. So that gets to be a very dangerous slope. But I think that's important for you all to know, because if somebody just sees our raw budget and they look at it, they're like, why can't I have this new thing? Or why can't I have these new, 10 positions? A new thing is a lot easier than 10 new bodies, right? Reoccurring versus one time. So that is the difference where you might see, and I think it's just important for you all to be aware of that, because people do ask questions and we want to be fully transparent with the budget and the finances. So I think it's important for you all to know. So funding, we actually used FY23 outcome data, and they estimated what they thought we would be at 24 and 25. So again, they gave us estimates, and that's where they could shore us up in 24, 25 based off of what we actually certified to them that we achieved. So does that make sense? So they're kind of projecting for us, forecasting. They do it on our behalf based on our data, and then hope we get there. If not, then they'll be like, we told you we're going to get X. Now you only qualify for Y. So we would owe them that back in the next year, next fiscal year. Questions? Okay. FAST program. So FAST has been something we've had a lot of talk about. We've heard a lot about. FAST is really dealing with our dual credit students and allowing them to be able to take dual credit classes from an institution at no charge to them. Okay, so if a student was eligible for free and reduced lunch, according to the ISD, typically they would qualify for FAST, meaning that they would not owe the institution funds to be able to be a dual credit student. So again, going back, we want to get more students those dual credits, right? And we want to remove all barriers to them being able to come to school. And finances are usually maybe the number one reason a student doesn't enroll in dual credit. Where it gets kind of tricky is, again, a lot of that we're relying on the ISDs to tell us who those students are and who qualifies. And so some of that kind of evolves throughout the year. But when you hear FAST, that really just means that the student themselves would not have to pay to take our dual credit. We would waive, in essence, the $44 per credit hour to them. And then the state would reimburse us a figure. So this is an optional program. I will tell you, not all community colleges in the state are participating in this. Many have not been able to participate because they are not able to shoulder the program, because part of it's great for the students, right? It's great for our partners. It's great for us. We only receive this year, so it was 55. We only receive 56.87 per credit hour or equivalency for those students. Well, you might say, well, okay, Kristy, but we only charge 44. Well, where that becomes interesting is that's 55 all in. So that's textbooks, course materials, anything. So that has to be all in 55.67. So even in this program, if there's course materials, if there's art supplies, if there's anything, a student who qualifies for FAST cannot be charged for any of those materials. And then as an institution, we would be reimbursed the 56 all in for that. So that makes sense. So if there's a community colleges charging 80 for dual credit, right, plus textbooks, they may not have chosen to participate because they may not be able to subsidize the difference. So optional FAST program, but Lone Star has participated since its inception, and I'm a huge fan of FAST. I think it serves a great need, and we're all about it, but it's definitely not necessarily, it's something we have to make sure we run the performer zone and at least know what that equivalency is, because sometimes they will tell us students qualify and they don't, and that's not the student's fault. So we have to kind of look through all of those various lenses. So I went through that really quickly on FAST, but I just want to make sure. Any questions or comments on that? Okay. So I wanted to show you again on here. I will share the presentation, but this is an example of what the coordinating board's website looks like. So when you go under the coordinating board, you go under our work, and there is these resources. So this is available to you. You can go see. And really the top 3 spreadsheets are the ones that really apply to this information. The funding model is as of August 9th. So you can see it's been updated even recently. You can see the new performance visualization tool and the financial simulation tool. So those are all tools that they've just now put out for us. We did not have this originally, where we could actually go in and we can play around with the numbers, see what other community colleges are getting, see what we're getting, and we can actually, in the simulation tool, play around and say, well, what if I did this? What if I increase this new program? What would that do, right? So that is a brand new tool, hot off the press, that we have just now been made available. Again, I know you can't see all the numbers, but I just wanted to take some static worksheets to tell you that you really have to be a data person to enjoy going through some of this. And you can see all the tiers at the bottom. So they give us all the formulas. So when I say I'm still a student myself, I will own the fact that this is a lot. This is data overload. But you can see, based off of Lone Star, I put it in the blue here, that equates to, it shows what we received in 23, what we received in 24, and you can see that right now, so full transparency, if the data holds out, we estimate to get about $15 million more in state funding than we got last year. However, right, it's performance outcomes, all the things. So we got, and that's about 16 million more than we got last year from that. And that's up substantially over the previous year. So we've been a beneficiary of increases through this, but again, the slippery slope is it's not guaranteed. So that's the part that I just have to own, that I don't want to be the Debbie Downer. I think it's a great program, but I'm cautiously optimistic when we look at that, and we have to make the numbers to be able to actually get those, because they were based off the state's forecasting. So yes. This is from the coordinating board. Yeah. Yes. The state has held them harmless the last couple years. So again, not everybody is on the positive side, right? And again, this is just forecasts. These are just estimates. And again, this is all what we were presented from the coordinating board. Yeah, none of this is my work. This is all the state. And this is what, if you went back to the slides, this is what is out there for all to see. That is what that spreadsheet is. But I just, when we talk about, there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes to try to understand these numbers. And there is a coordinating spreadsheet with everything back. So, is there a hand question? Okay, yes, sir. Correct. Potentially, but you can only spend anything in a year that you have budget authority for. So like, as an example, this past year, we underestimated our revenue by 8 million. But because that was not in our budget, we can't spend it. So that is part of the ever challenging of getting the number right, because you have to figure out what you're going to get, because if it's not in your budget authority, then even if we make it in revenue, we don't have permission to spend it. So yes. Right. It would go into surplus, correct. But again, where we try not to use reoccurring fees to do that. But yes, it's why the budget is somewhat of a complicated. We're now a $500 million organization. And so every dollar matters, and we are in a very good financial shape, but we just have to be very intentional. And the reason I wanted to be transparent, because again, somebody sees that number and you deny a request that they have, or somebody doesn't get a position and they have lots of reasons why there's lots of money sitting out there. Why can't I get this? So I think it's important for you to have the full story so you can understand a little bit more of the backstory and why it's just not an easy yes or no. And I like to be fully transparent. So, because I would love for us to be able to do all the things, but we have to make it work within the confounds of the budget authority. So this is another, so when we go back here under the CC performance visualization. So again, these are just static because I didn't want to try to fool with pulling up the website. You can see here, if you're really into the specific certification outcomes, you can see bachelor's degree, associate, ATC, OS, all the various categories, and you can filter this to your heart's content, just for your data, for your sources, for any of the stuff that you're doing. And you can actually do it per college. You can do the little filters over here and compare ourselves to any of our friends that you want to compare us to. And this continues to scroll down. So you can really see how we're doing percentage of academic, percentage of economic, percentage of adult. So all of the data that one could ever want to absorb in their life is right here in this spreadsheet. And can really, and I say that in jest, but it is a wonderful tool. It's just small doses, because it can really get in there, and 2 hours later, you're still digging around the information. But it's important to see at the top, you can also do dual credit transfer, co-enrollment, and you can see all the various categories that you can search. So every time you click on it, it's going to give you new data sets being pulled from the state data. So this is as good a data set as you can get, because it's coming from all the state institutions. Yes. Yeah. And so that's a great question. So again, how do you know that you're doing really well, right? So part of that we've looked at and we're continuing to unpack as this has been unpacked. So we're looking at investments. So we're looking at something as somebody wants to do something, somebody wants to look at new growth. How does that investment impact the college? So it's really, we're continuing to evolve what that has been, looks like. We have based that previously off of growth. And so this past year, we still continue to base it off of growth in programs, but we are continuing to evolve as to how that might look differently, right? Based on those student success. So how do we reward people from graduating? How do we reward you? And what does that look like? So I don't have all the answers to that, but I will tell you those conversations are having, because we are aware that that is an important thing to match up. And we're continuing to look at new ways. So as a chancellor's cabinet, that's something we're going to continue to explore together and try to figure out the most fair way to approach that. So I don't have that answer for you today, but we promise that we are working at looking at different ways besides growth to actually reward campuses based off of these metrics. Yes. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and some of that, again, that's where the rolling averages come in, that they're looking at this across multiple years. And so it really is a matter of, if we didn't get it from the state this time, it would eventually show up if it hits one of these outcomes, right? That we would get paid. But as an institution, so that's as a state reimbursement, right? So in your scenario, we would not receive it until at the time that they earn the credential based on the outcome. Based off of her question as to, as an institution, how do we reward those that have high success outcomes? And that's why there's what the challenge is we're trying to determine what a fair way to do that, because right now generate does not equal allocate. And I think that's the biggest misnomer. So I'll just say that again. Generate does not equal allocate, meaning we are not, because your program brings it in, because of all the complexity of our formula, it's just not how we budget. Ideally, we have to get there, right? We have to do it strategically, but that's going to be a much bigger undertaking as an institution than maybe we're culturally ready for right at this moment. But that's what we're looking at, is how do we fund, how do we incentivize, how do we encourage those things? And the only thing I can tell you is it's wonderful to have a group of peers and colleagues that support that and that are engaging in that, and we're having good conversations. We're just trying to get there together to figure out what that looks like. So, and I'm sure this group will be one of the first to know when we figure that out, and we can bring that and share that. But right now we are continuing to explore that, because again, as this model continues to unfold, by the time we figure it out, it may change again. So we're also trying to be sensitive to giving this some time to unfold. So, last thing I want to show you, and then I know, so this is the financial simulation. So again, going back, this is spreadsheet 3. So this is the one that if you really wanted to go in there, you could go in there and actually put in data. So this was dual credit count, and there's some various models in there, and you could actually go in there and say, well, maybe instead of 4,000, we would hit 5,000, or what if we grew 350 students? You can actually change that, and it would give you new allocations to show you what that would generate in formula in state appropriations. And then you can go hit the reset button, and nothing you did messed anything up for anybody else to see. So you can actually download the spreadsheet. But this is a tool that we will start to go in there as we look at programs and someone says, hey, I have this idea. Hey, we'd like to do this. And we're looking at it as an investment. This might be a tool that we can utilize to actually see what that would generate in state appropriation. So just wanted to show that for you all as something that you might be interested in for a tool. So. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're already looking at that a little bit right now with dual credit. And so one of the low hanging fruit is dual credit, to see like which of our programs are only getting 12 hours and like what it would take to get one more 3-hour course in there. Like that's some very low hanging fruit. As I say that to say, not easy, but it's something that we're looking at. That's an example. But yes, this just became available though a couple weeks ago. So we want to be able to explore it, but we also want to make sure we're lining that up with what the needs of the college are. We don't necessarily want the budget team to drive the strategy. We want the strategy to help inform what we do. So we're trying to craft that together. So, but yeah, we definitely are making ourselves aware of where we have opportunities that might fit our model, but not everything that has money tied to it should be something we do, right? We don't want money to be our motivator. So, and I think we're almost out of time, so I want to be respectful, but yes, ma'am. Yeah, so I think I understood your question. How do you support the students to continue to move them through? Oh, yeah. 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 So not lowering the standards, just, yeah, no, I agree. And that's really the task of this group, right? As you're looking at curriculum and faculty, I mean, we don't want to be an institution that is, graduating folks if they're not truly prepared. So we don't want to change our values to chase dollars. And so that's not something we want to do at all. So we want to maintain our standards while still supporting students and still helping to do that. And a lot of that is not just what's happening in the classroom. A lot of times they say students don't retain because of what happens outside the classroom, right? So I think some of that is just dealing with, support and helping them have advising and other things that they might need. So I wish I had the answer to your question, but I think that's really a challenge for this group to work together to solve, but definitely something we want to focus on. So yes, ma'am. That is one of the outcomes. Yes. Yeah. Yes. So that was one of the very tricky things when they came out early on, and we are working at the sources that they're telling us to use to track that. And so that is some of the formulas and some of the tools that they've just now provided as a way for us to look at that. So the state is supposed to be our partner in helping to track that. But yes, living wages is all part of that, and it's based off of, when they think a student would be able to pay back their investment. So yes. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, and unfortunately, the remedial classes and the K through 12 preparedness is not necessarily covered in this model. But again, I think that's just where we have to continue our partnerships with the ISDs to figure out how do we continue to support those students. Because again, and it goes back to fundamental, teaching languages, teaching basic math, because a lot of those gateway courses, math and science, may be the reason a student doesn't persist, right? So all of those factors play in as the institution, but are not reflected in this model, but something that we can't forget about, right? Because it does impact the cost of instruction, and we don't want a student having to pay to take a course 3 and 4 times. So. Mhm. Yeah, there is a yeah, there is a factor for that continuation. So. Yeah. And again, a lot of that is continuing to evolve. So again, a lot more than what we could impact in a session today. I do appreciate you for your time. And the most important thing is I just want you to know this is out there as a resource for you if you really want to continue to learn and explore. And really, like I said, if I leave you with one thing, it's just that, state appropriations now equal student success. It really is about those outcomes and not just students in the classroom. So we want to be a good partner. We want to be a good supporter of the faculty and all that you do. And so I appreciate you taking the time to at least learn a little bit about the financial thing and maybe have an appreciation that it's just not as easy as it might appear on paper. And we, welcome the collaboration and would love to be back for future sessions if you have additional things that you'd like to learn, and we can continue to learn from each other. So thank you again. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. So.
Thank you, Dr.